Hello there, I'm the 996. This is my second video about choosing the right antagonist for your story. The first video, which I will link below, more so was giving examples of other types of stories and how the antagonist basically worked in those stories. I will give one more example and then I will start giving you some questions to ponder when you can figure out what type of antagonist would be good for your story. So there is a TV show, actually it's an anime and also a manga series called Death Note. Now, for anyone who isn't quite familiar with the terms, anime basically are cartoons from Japan. They're not necessarily children's cartoons. They can be, but they also can have more mature themes for possibly teenagers and adults as well. Manga are basically the Japanese comic books, and instead of being read from right to left, as we do in America, they are read from left to right. Anyway, in Death Note, there is a teenager who is extremely smart and he is kind of bored with his life. At the beginning of this, I watched the anime and I read a little bit of the manga, so I will refer more so to the actual anime series. Anyway, in the anime, the main character, Light, finds a book called a Death Note. Out of curiosity, he opens it up and it has these rules. And spoiler alert, one of the rules in this book is if you write someone's name down, they will have a heart attack. Now, as any normal person would do, he doesn't believe that this book is real. He thinks it is stupid, it is a joke. But unfortunately, what he does is he decides to sort of test this for himself. He sees on TV that someone is going to hold up a children's school or some kind of classroom, and he writes down the person's name, and within the certain allotted time that this notebook says, they die of a heart attack. And then there's this creature called a Shinigami who appears, and while this character he does this, he starts to believe that he has the right to choose who should live and who dies. He takes pretty much the law into his own hands. He says, you know what? I can help save the world by writing names of who is not a just person into this notebook. And he calls the identity of when he writes names into the notebook Kira. So Kira starts to have a following, and then there's all this controversy. And you might think that is this the protagonist or is this the antagonist? And it's very interesting how this story progresses because it's mainly about him, but it's also about the other people, the police who are trying to find out who Kira is, people who feel that Kira is a good person for getting rid of criminals that law enforcement couldn't get rid of. But one thing that happens in the course of this story is Light starts to get a big head beyond belief, and he starts to think of himself as a deity and believes that he has the ultimate power, and sometimes he will, instead of following his moral system of basically writing people's names in the notebook and murdering criminals or people who are supposed to be doing something to hurt someone else, he decides to also use it for his own personal use if people slight him or he thinks someone might defy him. And it gets very dark. And then there are also other characters who deal with the notebook as well. So in this instance, if Light simply was a character who started out as wanting to just go and let me just kill anybody I want to and I can have my way and I write people's name in the notebook. Yes, it would have been an interesting story, but not necessarily as much as seeing how this character who, even though yeah, he pretty much, I guess we'll say he's pretty much was murdering people, he had a certain moral system that he's trying to implement that became very extremely twisted and only self fulfilling, in that he wasn't even trying to simply just help people any more in his own twisted way. So anyway, and now let's get back to, after watching this example, and hopefully you've watched my previous video about examples, how this can correlate to your story. Think of what type of story you have. Is this a story of good versus evil, such as an alien invading Earth? Is this has to do with a dystopian society where it's someone against societal norms, and also maybe the people who are inhabiting that? Does it have to do with a romance? Because if it's a romance, it might be someone or different people are making sure that the protagonist doesn't get with who they're in love with, like Romeo and Juliet, and they had the feuding families, and that kept them apart until they both basically killed themselves over all the doom and that had happened. Yes. So basically, think about what is happening to your protagonist. Let's say you have a story, and for instance, like there's a story book called Delirium by Lauren Oliver about what happens if the world believed that love was a mental illness, and you have a surgery that's supposed to make sure that you do not fall prey to deliria nervosa, which is basically the word for love. It is considered a mental illness in this story, and spoiler alert, the main character, she very much so goes with the rules. She's not really rebellious. She has a best friend who's more so rebellious, and sometimes they go to parties, and a friend is like more to, like, making out with guys, and you're supposed to be very careful about not falling in love because of how irrational love is, and people are set up with different factors about compatibility as far as maybe economic status and other factors that don't have anything to do with romantic feelings for each other. Anyway, what happens in that story is it's about the society being against the main character, Leia. But Leia, who is very, I said she's more so more laid back, she's not really rebellious, she falls in love. And that makes her go against the society, go against everything that she's been taught, not in a simple way of something to do with teenage rebellion just for its own sake, but simply because she fell in love and she didn't want to give that up. Is your story a dystopian novel where someone's going against society? Is it a story about like romance, and there's like what's keeping them apart? Is someone literally trapped away somewhere so they can't get to who they want to be with? Is it a matter of society in, like in Delirium? or is it about something such as a video, a story I referred to called Bright Blue Miracle by Becca was it Wilhite? Forgive me for mispronouncing the author's name. I said it correctly in the video beforehand. Is it have to do with family structures and how they changed? Is it the antagonist necessarily a good person? Or they have some type of deranged mindset where they believe that they're doing something for the greater good? What type of situation is your protagonist in? What are the things that another thing you need to think about? If you have a story, your protagonist wants something. That's pretty much what a story is about. Like, your protagonist wants or is trying to obtain something. You need to figure out what that is. It could be the protagonist trying to simply figure out what the meaning of life is. It may be them trying to figure out what the meaning of life. They feel like certain things are getting in the way. I mean, what does your character want? Maybe it's about more than one character. What do your protagonists want? And based on that, think about what kind of antagonist would be appropriate for the story and the type of story that you have. What type of genre that you're writing in. Also, I will just tie this up by saying, when I was little, I grew up watching Sailor Moon, an anime about a clumsy teenage girl who tried to save the world, and who ended up having, though she's very clumsy and she's very, what can I say? She's she's clumsy, she's silly. She wasn't the best at having good grades, but she had a really good heart, and I really admired Sailor Moon. That's the main character. However, a lot of the villains in this story were not simply these villains that were just evil. Yes, there were certain villains that simply had a goal of, I want to take over the world, or something such as that, and I'll do anything necessary. But also, some of these villains were misunderstood. They had they came from maybe different backgrounds, and they realized how they got involved with following some type of maybe head villain, or even you could sometimes see certain traits about the head villains that made you realize that they weren't just simply all evil, even though they were they were not good at all. They're very evil in certain degrees. It's like there's still something about them that had some type of goodness in them. Whatever you do, whatever type of story you want to write, if you want to write a story that's simply about a villain who is a psychopath or whatever, figure out what type of villain works for your story. Personally, I like certain richness with villains, no matter what type of villain it is. But I really believe asking yourself what type of antagonist work for your story is really going to help make the story move forward in a direction that is going to be helpful when it comes to writing. I think you should have this down pat, at least have an idea of what type of antagonist is good for your story, either before you start writing or within the first few chapters. I mean, I know everyone has a different process, but I would suggest that you do know that sooner rather than later. Give me a thumbs up, hopefully, if you liked it, and comment below if you have any type of comment. Thank you.